Amazing. Welcome to the TiddlyWiki community call.
It worked.
I have some slides that are more in the matter of an outline. So I am going to put those up. So we have them. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, it's
perfect.
fine.
Thank you very much. So basically, this is an opportunity to talk about a bunch of different things that we have going on. I will talk at the end a little bit about some work with Open Collective and Discourse Forum. But other than that, I'm going to hand it over to Zach and Jeremy to talk about some core dev work, but the file uploads plugin that Zach is leading. And then we'll talk a little bit about Open Collective and then the Discourse Forum that kind of is in beta and up and running. Thank you very much to Mario, who also has volunteered as a moderator and admin, and has already done lots of fixes and upgrades to various things, which has been great. So all of this is for the community as a whole. So please, questions, topics, discussion, anything that we want to get into, this is live time for us to do that. So as I said before, feel free to just unmute yourself or stick up your hand, and we'll leave some time at the end for open discussion as well. Any other questions? Awesome. Zach, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, so I think I'll start off by talking about the file uploads plugin, and then we'll loop back to talking about more so the TiddlyWiki core, at which point I'm hoping Jeremy will join me. So the idea today is not really to have a technical discussion, but to talk about technical things. So if it gets a little bit too difficult to follow, please do say so, because that is not what we're trying to do today. So I assume that everyone here today knows what TiddlyWiki is, so I'm not going to start off with that. But I will start off by saying that there are two common configurations. One is you run your TiddlyWiki as a single HTML file. And the other is that you run it using Node.js, in which case every tiddler is saved as a different file. And it seems like the single file paradigm is the more popular, which is understandable. It's a very elegant and portable solution. You have a single file, you can send it back and forth, you can share it, it's easy to save, it's easy to back up. And one of the pain points that comes up frequently is when people want to work with other files like images or PDFs and link to them or include them in their wiki. How do you do that? And TiddlyWiki is fantastic in the sense that you can literally drag and drop in an image or a PDF, and it will put that into a tiddler and include it in the wiki for you. But doing so can lead to very large file sizes, which can cause problems with load times, save times, just overall the size of the wiki if you need to email it back and forth, for example. And while you can link to and include external files, images, PDFs, there's no easy workflow for it. And that was the motivation for the file uploads plugin, to make that easier. So if you do want to use images or PDFs or any other external file really in your wiki, but not have it actually saved inside the wiki, to make that process easier. So this plugin didn't really come about because, I decided to solve my own problem. It actually came about because of Open Collective, which we're currently experimenting with. And the idea originated, I assume, from a combination of Jeremy and Boris, and there was backing for it from different people in the community. And it so happened that the first call I joined that was talking about Fission and TiddlyWiki talked about that plugin, and that synchronizes with my own interests because it's something that I need for my own work. I've played around in this area. So the main point there is that the development of this plugin has been driven by the needs and desires expressed by those Open Collective backers, meaning by the community. So what we have today is we have a file upload plugin. It is a beta version. It is perfectly usable. The architecture is such that you have pluggable uploader modules. What that literally means is they're sub-plugins. So let's say you want to save your files to GitHub. That's a GitHub uploader module. If you want to save it to Fission, that's a Fission uploader module. The idea being that way you could add support to whatever saving backend you want. It could be Node.js. It could be writing to your local file system. You could do all of that and still use the main plugin, which is still the same plugin. So I think I'm going to share my screen at this point. Let's see. Okay, so please do let me know if that is too small to read. I've tried to make sure the text scaling is right. So this is the beta version of the upload plugin that is available as of today. And right now, we have 2 uploader modules available. The first one, and the one that is the most stable, I would say at this point, is Fission's Web Native. And the reason for that is simply that in the open collective that we ran, that is the one that got funded first, which indicates that that is the one that there was the greatest desire or support for from the community. And the GitHub one actually doesn't have any support at this time, but I did go ahead and write an experimental GitHub uploader. It has some rough edges, but it does work. And the reason I did that is both because it's helpful from a development point of view to at least have 2 working uploader modules so we can test things with. And also because I think that the GitHub model for both saving wikis and files is a promising one for the community. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to demo the way that this works both on Web Native and on GitHub. So for Web Native, we're going to go to TiddlyWiki on Fission. So for those of you that don't know what TiddlyWiki on Fission is or what Fission is, I will give the really brief explanation, which Boris will probably be like, oh my God, you're missing all the points, but that's fine. So very simply put, in a non-technical manner, you can think of Fission as being a storage service in the cloud where you can save your files. Think of it like Google Drive or Dropbox, but better. And one of the things that makes it better is that you actually get a file system. So for example, if you had 2 files, a TiddlyWiki and an image in your Google Drive, and you're viewing them over a public URL by sharing it, you can't link to the image, even if they're in the same folder, by just using the image name. It gets this weird obfuscated URL. So it's very difficult that way. It doesn't feel like you're working like you would on a folder in your local computer. What's nice with Fission is that you literally do get that local file system experience, but in the cloud. It makes it easier to manage your files. It makes it easier to link between files, because if you put things in the same folder, you can just use a link to it using the file name. It's that simple. So TiddlyWiki on Fission is a Fission app, which is basically a service that allows you to create and edit your TiddlyWikis on Fission, meaning they get saved to Fission's web native storage backend. And you can have a public wiki, or you can have a private wiki, and you can also have a read-only URL for your public wiki. So there's a different editor URL and there's a different read-only URL. So we're going to go ahead now and actually create a public wiki. So these are different editions that are available. We're just going to choose the standard TiddlyWiki version 5.2.13. Scroll back up. Let's call this upload.html. And we create a new wiki. And that's what it looks like. I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. We can change this name. We'll save again. And if we go back to this TiddlyWiki on Fission app, and I just refresh it, and I click on public, you'll see that upload.html is now in that folder. That means that the wiki got saved. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to install the uploads plugin in this wiki. So that means going over to where I have the uploads plugin tab open. So I'm going to drag and drop the uploads plugin first. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to drag and drop the Fission uploader. And we have the issues. It's just like importing tiddlers and TiddlyWiki like we normally do. And that's been auto-saved. Now, one of the things that's important to note here is that it's recommended to disable autosave when you're using the upload plugin. And the idea is that it saves you from using twice the bandwidth. Otherwise, you'd first be saving the file you imported in the wiki and then uploading it as well. There's no real harm if you don't care about your bandwidth to leave it enabled, but otherwise it can be a good idea to go ahead and disable that. Okay, so we go ahead and save that, and we're going to reload the wiki. So, okay, we have the uploads file plugin in here now, and we have the Fission uploader in here. So if we come now to the settings tab for file uploads, you see that it includes a dummy uploader. This is something that will eventually no longer be shipped with the file uploads plugin. It is basically a testing interface. It lets you test how the way uploading works, and all it does is log things to the browser console. And it's also there for guidance for people who want to write an uploader. It kind of shows you the minimum code that you need. So we're going to go ahead and switch that to Fission. That's the uploader we're going to use. If we had more uploaders installed, they would be available in this dropdown. And then, as you can see, it asks you about a path relative to the root of the public folder where you want our files to go. And by default, it says files, which means that if we come back to TiddlyWiki on Fission, under public, it will create a folder called files. And in that, it will put any files that we're uploading. Okay, that's great. So that's all set up. So now is where hopefully things don't go wrong, because I'm going to try importing an image. And when I do so, what I recommend is to pay attention to the top right-hand corner of the screen. It might go by a little bit fast, but that's where you're going to see sort of feedback on what's happening. Well, that didn't work. You have to drag and drop up here. Here we go. Okay, so I'm importing an image. So it went by really quickly, but if you're paying attention or fast enough, what it said was uploading one file and then uploads completed. And if we come back to TiddlyWiki on Fission here and refresh, you're going to see that, oh, we have a files folder, and in it we have the image. Oh, I kind of also want to just mention here, the images I'm using at the moment are from Raw Pixel, which is a fantastic site for royalty-free images for non-commercial use. So I did want to mention that because it's a nice project that I think deserves some support. Now, one of the interesting things you might have noticed is, oh, I clicked that. The image doesn't seem to be working, even though it is over here. This is a shortcoming or sort of restriction that we have in common between both the Fission uploader and the GitHub uploader, which is that once the files have been uploaded, it will take a short amount of time before it actually becomes available at the URL. But if you edit this tiddler now, you can see that this is a canonical URI tiddler. The image is not being saved in the wiki anymore. And this is one of the things that I understand is not a particularly great user experience, not being able to see your image right away. And especially for TiddlyWiki on Fission, I think that Jeremy is working on a few things that might make that user experience better. And we are thinking about sort of the ways in which this user experience can be improved. But the image itself has been uploaded, and ironically, it's taking longer than it usually does to turn up, which of course it has to do since we're demoing. So while we're waiting for that, what I'm going to do is go ahead and show you what it looks like to actually upload more than one image. And I keep making the same mistake. I apologize. I have to drag and drop it all the way up here. Okay, so if you notice now, I am importing 6 images. And that count is important, and I'll point out why. So when I hit import, it says uploading 5 files. And then it says uploads completed. We come back to TiddlyWiki on Fission and refresh this. You will see that all the files are there. And the reason that we imported 6 images and we ended up with 5 being uploading is interesting. And it kind of tells you a little bit about the way that this plugin works. It uses a filter that basically determines what to get uploaded. And this is something that we're hoping in the future to simplify the interface for, so people don't have to write filters. What this filter is doing is it's approximately looking at the size and saying if it's above 100 kilobytes, go ahead and upload the image. So one of the images that I uploaded was too small, or rather imported was too small, therefore it didn't get uploaded. You could take out this part of the filter altogether, and every single file that you drag in will get uploaded. So it's completely configurable that way in terms of being able to decide, what does and does not get uploaded.
So you could also do things like only upload PNGs or only upload JPEGs.
Absolutely.
Like
so you can tweak that filter to, let's say I want to upload PDFs only. And that's totally fine. You could also tweak it where you have a different size setting for PDFs and a different size setting for images, and it really does not matter. And I'm going to look at Boris now and say, what did you do to the Fission servers when I have to demo things? Why is everything taking so long?
I am pressing some buttons in the background because we, of course, in fact, migrated some infrastructure last night. So there are some bugs there. The files are all there, but they are not currently
right. So usually the delay is more like 20-30 seconds. It's not normally this long. The reason we see this image is because this is the one that was too small and did not get uploaded versus these which have been uploaded.
Interesting. So that little one is just a data URI, or?
Yeah, so that's base 64 encoded data that is saved inside the tiddler. That's traditionally the way that TiddlyWiki.
Could you hit the edit button just so that we can see that?
Yeah, so it presents itself in an image editor. You're not actually seeing the raw data. So you could write on it, do whatever you want to, and be able to save it again. And apparently just doing that added enough data that it actually got uploaded. One of the other interesting things here is this page control over here, which enables and disables uploads. So it's enabled, you can disable it, and that can be useful if you're working offline. It can be useful if maybe you want to edit the image and keep working on it and eventually save it when you're done, right? Because you're worried about your data usage. So I think what we're going to do is sort of move on to the GitHub uploader and sort of come back to this later. And
Zach, I do have a question. And can you go back to the filter?
Sure. Give me one moment, please. That's the efficient upload. Yes.
So it's does it need to be one filter in one line, or is this several lines? So is it possible to add several filters?
So this is one filter. This is one filter that gets executed, and anything that matches this filter, of course, will be included. But of course, you can have multiple filter runs. So you could do multiple runs, and anything that matches any one of the runs is going to get included. So you can have one for JPEGs, one for PNGs, one for PDFs. And the thing that wasn't intentionally intended to be supported, but does work because the underlying mechanism is very flexible, is it can be a non-binary tiddler as well. You can go ahead and upload a plain text tiddler, a TID tiddler. It will work because the underlying mechanism doesn't really care. It's a tiddler, it will upload it for you. Okay, so I'm gonna pin this one on Boris, as in Boris, what have you done? And then we're gonna move on to trying to do a Git demo on GitHub. So what I've done on GitHub is I have tried to save us a little bit of time by actually setting up a wiki on GitHub. It is a TiddlyWiki 5.1.23, the latest version. I have installed the file uploads plugin, and I have installed the GitHub uploader. As I said, this is the more experimental one because it was basically something that I decided I wanted to work on, both because I think it's interesting for the community and because it's useful to have two different things to test with when you're developing something new. But there are some rough edges, one of which is that it does require you to have filled out the GitHub saver settings because it will use some of these. And for those that don't know, these settings basically allow you to host a file on GitHub and basically be able to edit it, save it back, all without ever having to know what Git is or really interact with GitHub again. I honestly think that once it's set up, it's as easy as using some of the other services like TiddlySpot used to be or TiddlyHost is now. It's really good. If you are curious about how to do that, our friend Kukma has a fantastic guide on how to set up a TiddlyWiki on GitHub so that you can actually edit and save. And this link has been posted in the forum post later if you want to find it easily. Okay, so what we're going to do now here is basically the same thing that we did over there. But here, as you can see, I have the GitHub uploader installed. And again, I'm using the file's name, but if we could change it to anything we wanted to. I'm bringing up this GitHub interface only to show you where the files end up. It's important to understand that you do not need at all to use GitHub after initially setting up the saver. You don't ever need to open this interface. You don't need to know anything about Git to be able to use this. But as you can see, all we have here is an index.html, which is our wiki file. And now we're going to try importing some images. So I'm going to be optimistic and go ahead and drag in, a bunch of, well, keep repeating that mistake. I think we fixed that on the pre-release, haven't we?
Yeah, it should be fixed. It should be fixed on the pre-release. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. I run the pre-release myself, so I'm so used to not having to worry about that always catches me off guard. So we're going to go ahead and import these. So it says uploading 5 files again. They're the same files, so that's why one of them did not get uploaded. And then it says uploads completed. And if we come back to this GitHub repository and refresh, you see we have a files folder, and inside it we have the files that we just uploaded. And we come back here. Ooh, guess what? GitHub is faster than Fission today. Sorry, Boris. So that's the experience that we actually want. And if you actually edit the tiddler, you see that the image is not being saved in the tiddler. It's actually at the canonical URI. You can right click that and open, and you have your image there. So that is a user experience the way ideally we want it to be. GitHub pages can also have a small delay after things are uploaded before they're available at the URL. But usually I actually find Fission to be faster. I don't know what they did last night. So that's all I'm going to say to that. I will also point out that Boris is known on the forums as a breaker of code. So that might be why I keep pointing at him. The other thing I'm going to show you is what happens if you import a PDF. So this is Alice in Wonderland. So we go ahead and upload this, and it's going to take a bit longer because it's a bigger file. And if we come back here, we see, oh, great, the PDF Alice in Wonderland has been uploaded as well. And see, this is what I mean. So this 404 is just because GitHub has not yet managed to publish that file at the URL, even though it's been saved. So this is where we have to wait a little bit. And with GitHub, it's a bit arbitrary. It can take a couple of seconds. It can take 30 seconds. You're not really sure. There we go. So that is the PDF that we're viewing now inside of TiddlyWiki. But if we edit the tiddler, we see that this is a canonical URI tiddler. So the size of that PDF is not contributing to the size of our TiddlyWiki anymore. So one of the things I'd like to mention here is that the file uploads plugin itself is agnostic of how you save your wiki and where it's hosted. It really doesn't care. It could be a local, it could be Tiddly Desktop. It could be Node.js. It could be on TiddlySpot, on GitHub, on Fission. It really is agnostic. It has nothing to do with that. The individual uploader modules, though, can have their own requirements. If we come back to this one on Fission, the Fission uploader actually requires that you're running TiddlyWiki on Fission. And that's because that is how you get access to the code that is required to be able to save things to the Fission web native file system. Similarly, if we look at the GitHub uploader, it doesn't really have other requirements, but it's worth looking at GitHub's terms of service for GitHub pages, which I think are actually rather generous. They give you a lot of storage if you're hosting a site there. So if you have a wiki and want to upload extra files, images, everything, it's very liberal. But I do think that you'd be going against your terms of service if you're hosting your wiki somewhere else and just uploading the images here, even though technically it is possible. So that's not really a technical limitation when it comes to GitHub, but it's more just about respecting their terms of service. Okay, so before we move any further from here, are there any questions at this point?
Yeah, did you need any additional settings at GitHub, or is it just the setting for the standard TiddlyWiki saver?
So right now, everything is taken from the GitHub saver. I think the only things we actually need are the personal access token, username, and repository. The others.
I was thinking about the files directory, so this can be any directory name as you like. So
yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's
cool. You can just rename it here to whatever you want to, and that will work. And this is one of the things that it would be nice to clean up if we have community support for a GitHub uploader module, to be able to sort of make it a bit more flexible, because maybe there are some settings you want to use different. Maybe you want to use a different username, but it's the same repository and it has the right credentials for it. And from a technical point of view, without going into details, I use a third-party library here called Octocat to upload things to GitHub. And there is a newer and official library that we should be using instead. I just use Octocat because I've used it before, so it was 15 minutes worth of work instead of trying to create, basically use something new. So those are future improvements, but it works. There's no problem with the actual functionality at this point.
Question from Walt on Fission. So we're still a beta service, and we have like beta all over the place, but we generally have a generous freemium tier that'll generally be a gig of personal data and 100 gigs of bandwidth per month. I actually had somebody end up hitting up that 100 gigs of bandwidth the other day because a very popular launch of something ended up using Fission infrastructure. So I was happy to see that hold up. In general, the way that we think about this, so Microsoft is funded by GitHub. It's a great service. A ton of us developers use it for tons of things. If you're a little more technical, the GitHub saver is absolutely great. Where we want to get Fission to get to is that there should be easy for people to just sign up and just use without the overhead of having to deal with Git and GitHub. And for developers, TiddlyWiki developers who want to essentially build TiddlyWiki powered apps or additions, that's something that we want to support as well. So happy to talk to people more about that if they want to dig into more on what that looks like.
Right. I'd like to chip in here and say that I've actually never experienced this issue before. Most of my work with Fission has been very smooth to the extent that I feel that it's close to offering a very nice user experience for the average TiddlyWiki user who is not technical. And this is, like Vera said, there's been some upgrades or something, so something's a bit off here. But this is not usual. It's not usual to have issues with it. It has been working rather smoothly in my experience. Okay, if there are no more questions, then I'll sort of continue on from there. So as I mentioned before, the idea and the stimulus for making this plugin came from Open Collective, so from the community who decided to back this work. And there had been an initial description written of what the work might look like, which was full of a lot of suppositions because obviously it hadn't been explored properly. And when we started working on this, in the beginning, Jeremy and I had a lot of discussions about how to orient the architecture in terms of making it a good candidate for the core, in terms of making it flexible and also maintainable. And one of the things that came up very often is that there was a lot of overlap with existing functionality. We already have things in the core that allow you to save or sync, different files or tiddlers or the entire wiki to different places. And it seemed like what we were talking about here would be replicating some of those features. And as a result of that, we decided that there was a lot of opportunity there for refactoring some of the core functionality in a way to make it more flexible. So if we already have subsystems that have to do with saving, let's make them more flexible to do more and be able to encompass other use cases. And that avenue is very exciting. And it offers a lot of potential, but we are talking about a very large piece of work, a lot of refactoring that we hope is going to go the way that we think it is. But obviously there are no guarantees until we actually attempt that work. And it's hard to put a timescale on it. It could be 6 months, it could be a year. And what we realized is that while that was very exciting for the core and it was exciting from a developer's point of view, it doesn't actually meet the needs of the community and the Open Collective backers who actually need something now, or rather soon, that actually is usable, especially because there's no guarantee that our plans will actually work out. We think they will, we're pretty confident, but it was decided that we needed to put the needs of the community first. So we decided that we would go ahead and work on this plugin. One of the things we changed was that we decided not to worry too much about making this a core plugin at this point and go ahead and then develop this outside the core, which means that we can be more flexible, we can do faster releases, we can experiment with things without tying ourselves down to backwards compatibility while we are in the beta stage. And then this process of developing this plugin is also helpful in understanding how those long-term goals might look like and whether or not they are feasible or not. And so far that has been the experience. It's been very helpful developing this plugin and that it has actually supported the ideas that we have for the core, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. So that is why this has been published outside of the TiddlyWiki core library. And that's precisely because trying to make this a core plugin from the beginning would not be flexible enough for us to allow users to have something usable right away. And we would have to it would take a lot longer simply trying to figure out the pros and cons of a lot of decisions that would need to be made for the core. So that's sort of where we are now with the plugin as it is now. And if there aren't any questions about the plugin as it's been published or what I've demonstrated today, then we're going to kind of switch over to talking about the core a bit more in terms of the subsystems that I've alluded to and the refactoring that I've mentioned.
Time to clean and then lunch.
Franco.
Yes.
I've gone ahead and muted Franco. Franco, there you
Sorry
go.
about that. Sorry about
No
that, guys.
No problem.
Okay, so I assume there aren't any questions.
I do have a question.
Oh,
Sorry.
yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was really awesome to see. I just wanted to confirm something with you.
Mhm.
Because I haven't had a chance to play around with the actual GitHub or Fission uploaded just yet. I've just been using the dummy to experiment. So I
Right.
just wanted to confirm, when you're working offline, for example, and you've probably switched off disabled the upload plugin,
Mhm.
and working offline, when you immediately re-enable it, does it automatically trigger uploads
Yes, it
on the
does.
spot? Yes, it does.
Yes, it
Okay.
does.
All
And
right.
if you are working offline, the thing you need to think about is, how are you saving your wiki, which is a concern that you would have independently of using this plugin or not. So, you need to make sure that you don't lose any data while you're offline and you are saving your wiki regularly. But then as soon as you enable the file uploads again, it will automatically start uploading any pending uploads.
Gotcha.
Okay, and I'll add a question of my own there. Does that sort of fit the experience you were expecting, or did you have something else in mind?
Absolutely. That was exactly what I was trying to confirm. It fits
Okay.
my expectations. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, then I've done something I almost never do. I prepared some slides, so we're gonna throw those up on the screen.
But don't worry, they're TiddlyWiki powered slides.
Yeah, they're TiddlyWiki powered slides, and this is a TiddlyWiki that you can go and take a look at. The URL for this will be published as well. So, and I'm hoping Jeremy will pipe in wherever necessary to sort of add a bit more background to what we're going to talk about here. So, as I alluded to, there are subsystems in TiddlyWiki that overlap with some of the work that we're trying to do right now. There are saving mechanisms and there are syncing mechanisms, for example. And if we talk about savers first, or rather saver modules, they are responsible for saving an entire TiddlyWiki file. So you can have a saver that saves to GitHub, for example. You have one that saves to Fission, for example. You have the download saver that just downloads the TiddlyWiki file when you have changes and you don't have a different saver enabled. So that's one of them, one of the subsystems that we think we have overlap with. And the other, of course, is syncer modules. And syncers will be familiar to those of you that have been using TiddlyWiki on Node.js, because we have the TiddlyWiki adapter for the Node.js server, or to talk to the Node.js server. And then we have the file system adapter that's actually running on the server to write things to the disk. In non-technical terms, what you need to know here is that a syncer is responsible for synchronizing a single tiddler back and forth. So it's not saving an entire TiddlyWiki file, it's saving an individual tiddler. And then Jeremy has been doing some prototyping in the last months on the idea of static file publishing and how we can make that easier in TiddlyWiki. And that included a proposal for a new type of module called publishers. And publishers, they might save a single tiddler. They might save a rendering of multiple tiddlers. And when I mean a rendering of multiple tiddlers, you can think of publishing a static site where maybe you have 3 tiddlers per page, however you want to, architect that. And there's a definite overlap with savers, because savers save an entire wiki, which is multiple tiddlers. And then when we started talking about the upload plugin,
just to say that, in fact, of course, a saver actually saves a rendering of a tiddler as well, because we have a single template that defines the single file wiki. So this is the thing that's so striking, is it's like we've walked into a shopping. I was going to make a terrible analogy, but everywhere you look, you see these similarities, but also confusingly, everywhere you look, you see subtle differences. And the art of figuring out how you structure something to make those differences and similarities obvious and to be able to take advantage of the commonality, that's what we're trying to do.
Right. And just to clarify that for our more non-technical users, from a user perspective, it looks like a saver is saving multiple tiddlers. It's not a single tiddler, but under the hood, the mechanism that is used is a single tiddler that actually puts things together, the HTML file, the correct bits in the correct places. So that's why Jeremy is correct in saying that a saver is actually saving a rendering of a single tiddler as well. It depends on how you look at it. And then when we started looking at the uploader plugin, the uploader modules, was sort of the first answer that we got. Okay, we need some kind of modules that allow you to save files to different backends. So that was a potential approach, and that is what we've gone to. But as you can probably already notice, there's overlap there with publishers that we just looked at, which is part of static file publishing, still experimental and not implemented. There's overlap with savers, there's overlap with syncers. And this sort of indicates to us that there's a lot of common functionality here that should be shared between these systems, and we should be able to create a saving mechanism, for example, for one backend and be able to use it in all of these different contexts. So savers, syncers.
I just want to point out and maybe just expand on that as well. So a lot of this, so we're going to try and keep this explainable and everything else that, but the discovery part of this is also saying like, okay, aside from doing plugins, plugin discovery says, hey, this can inform core work. So this is really Jeremy and Zach working together and going, hey, it doesn't make sense to kill ourselves doing workarounds or plugins having to do that. This is some stuff that can lead to core improvements that may not be immediately visible at the user level. And we have to do a good job of explaining what those feature impacts are. But for developers, gives them new toolkits to be able to do stuff that was either hard or not possible at all before. Is that fair in the way that I've said it?
It is fair. And even the work that we've done so far, the work that I've done so far on the upload plugin, I wrote that from scratch, trying not to think about the way things have been done in the core. And the end product highly resembles the sync mechanism, which again supports the idea that that commonality, it is there. And yes, part of the reasoning also for wanting to make this the file uploads plugin a non-core plugin was precisely because we can experiment with things now without having to worry about committing ourselves to backwards compatibility and be able to perform or try to perform this longer term refactoring and thereby bring more features to the TiddlyWiki core, which will not just be for developers, but for end users as well. And I'll touch upon that in a bit. So savers, syncers, publishers, uploaders, they all involve some form of synchronization. If we think of synchronization as a means of saving something to a destination or maybe fetching it from a destination, then all of these submodules that we've talked about, they involve a form of synchronization. Maybe it's in one direction, maybe it's back and forth, but it is a form of synchronization. And you're either saving a single tiddler or you're saving a rendering of tiddlers. And this includes everything from the mechanism for saving a TiddlyWiki to synchronizing individual tiddlers, to being able to publish static files, to being able to upload binary files. So that gave us the idea that we could reimagine savers, for example, as a unidirectional syncer. So it's synchronizing a rendering of all of your tiddlers in your wiki in the correct format to a target destination. And a syncer can save a single tiddler or renderings of tiddlers. And then publishing and uploading are unidirectional syncers. We are basically sending data from the TiddlyWiki to a medium on which we want it saved. And the big concern here, of course, is how does that mesh in with backwards compatibility for all of the systems that exist today in TiddlyWiki? And this is going to be one of the major goals of the refactoring process. How do we do this refactoring and try to make things more flexible and allow for new use cases without breaking things that already work? Because we have a lot of existing saver and syncer modules. And right now, we're writing uploader modules as part of this plugin, right? And we do want to be able to support those moving forwards. And we have some ideas around how that could work, both with, especially the uploader modules, we've tried to write in a way that we hope that they will be a compatible interface with the one that the core is going to end up with. And for the existing saver and syncer modules, it's a bit too early to say how we plan to do that, but it is a priority. It could be that we leave the existing mechanisms that support those modules in place, and the new mechanism sits alongside it. It could be that the new mechanism can support the older code. We're not entirely sure, but that is one of the bigger challenges in what we're trying to do. And then trying to talk a little bit more about what benefits this presents for end users and not developers, right? So some applications. So One of the obvious ones is publishing static files. You can do that today with TiddlyWiki, but it is a bit convoluted, and we want to make that process easier. Another thing you'd be able to do is save individual tiddlers or wikis to multiple locations. So for example, you could have a TiddlyWiki that has public tiddlers that are getting saved to one location and private to another. You could save a public version of your entire wiki to GitHub, for example, for people to see, and have a private one that has extra tiddlers that only gets saved to your local device. I know that RSS has sort of gone out of fashion, but you could generate one. You could generate RSS feed because some of us still use them. Me, for example, and sitemaps. Uploading binary files is one of them. And then the last point on that slide might surprise you, photo galleries and Pinterest style apps, but that's like a me thing because I have an alter ego that has a rather successful career as a fashion photographer. And it's something that I've always wanted is, you know, a better mechanism for getting feedback from clients on photographs or being able to create mood boards and not having to share my data with other parties. And it would be very, very easy to be able to set that up with the kind of architecture that we're talking about. I'll do a bit of a segue here to talk about something that I discovered as a byproduct of the work on the file uploader plugin, even though it was not really the main focus. Because what I realized, for example, working with the Fission version of the uploader plugin is not only can I save canonical URI tiddlers and in the wiki and upload the files, I can do the opposite. So for example, when your wiki starts, you can have it configured to look at the same folder. And every file that's already there, if you don't have a canonical URI tiddler for it, you can create one, which basically means you get to the point where you can drop a TiddlyWiki into a folder and end up with tiddlers where each one represents a file. So that makes it very easy to set up a photo gallery. You could comment on the photos and whatever you want, really. It's very exciting. And what's also very interesting here is that's synchronization. That's a form of bidirectional synchronization. To the server, we're saving the files and creating a tiddler representing them. And we're doing the opposite. If the file's already there, we're also creating the tiddler representing them. So that for me is very, on a very personal level, is very, very exciting because it's something I've wanted to do, but it's always seemed like it would be too much work, but it wouldn't be with this in place. And then the next slide is basically my prompt to ask everyone if they have any questions. Yes, boys.
Yeah.
Jazz hands, applause.
Okay. Applause.
Yeah, I do find.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I wanted to jump in because that was really exciting, and I wanted to add a bullet point to your list, Zach, because I've been experimenting with what I call live multiplayer, where you can have multiple users interacting with a same wiki and have, you know, that live Google Docs experience. So this is really exciting.
Right, and I should add here and say that, you know, all of this is discussions so far. None of this is set in stone. So the next step for Jeremy and I is going to be that when we have the time to actually write this up as a GitHub ticket, so that other developers can also add their wisdom and their comments and feedback, and we can try to figure out a strategy for actually working on this.
Hello, sorry I'm late.
Hi, Eric. Good to see you.
Hi.
Hey, Jeremy. Hey, everyone.
Hey,
I was just going to reflect very briefly on, we're just finishing up on the, well, not quite finishing up, but halfway through the upload plugin stuff, that the Sachs skillfully weaved two important stories together. And the journey, for me at least, has been sort of learning how to disentangle them. And it's been quite interesting that this story is about Open Collective and how that changes the way that we approach developing the TiddlyWiki core. So Open Collective, you know, hinges upon people stepping up and committing resources, financial resources, to a particular goal. And in doing so, we establish a sort of aggregate collective client that then the person who picks up the work, in this case, Zach, works for the client. And a lot of the other part of what we're discussing is how different that is than when Zach and I and Eric and others involved normally talk about core development. Because core developments are driven by, dominated by our backwards compatibility concerns, which Zach touched on several times in the talk. and that the requirement for backwards compatibility, the desire for flexibility, and the desire to wring every bit of composable flexibility from the primitives that we introduce makes working on the core a really great pleasure. It's a great sort of intricate intellectual pleasure. And yet what we found is that, and we thought that's what we'd be doing for Open Collective or for this Open Collective project. But what we've realized working on it is that this actually works much better, we think, if we focus relentlessly on user needs. And there's a reason why we chose the Uploads plugin, is that it fills what for many of us would be a massive hole in using TiddlyWiki. I have a 60 megabyte single file TiddlyWiki that I use every day that contains guitar music with all these whacking great images in it. And obviously I should do something sensible with them, and I never do. I just sit there with them in the single file. And so I mean that literally everybody, this is a universally useful function. And yet what we find, of course, is the details of how we'd all like to use this functionality are very different. Some of us want to use it on Fission, some of us are going to want to use it on Node.js and other platforms. And so what ends up being the thing that we're really exploring that we don't normally is what users want and how important those things are to users in a much more intense way than I think we normally do when we're just doing core development. So it's been a really interesting process for me. I'm really excited by the Open Collective work. For many of us working on software, love it so much that our dream is to be paid for it, and finding new flexible ways to do that are better than some of the frankly terrible jobs that I had to do, in the previous decades. That would be a great advance. So I really want this to work, and obviously it needs to work in the sense of SAC being happy to do what is quite a lot of work for the money, but also the engagement of all of you on the call and everybody else in the community who I hope are going to find this tool useful.
Right, and one of the things that I would add there is that if we had done this the usual way we do core work, you probably wouldn't have seen any real output from this work for another 12 months or maybe even more, because there's a lot of architectural decisions to be made, which we have to always be very considerate about because of our commitment to backwards compatibility. And that not only would that not meet the user needs, but then in a way you're also developing these really big subsystems a bit in a vacuum, whereas this approach allows us to take a user-centered approach to the process, which is not only good for users because they get something usable now, but then the feedback that we get from all of you, and even the learning experience thus far and the feedback we've had, even getting to this beta stage, is both informing the development of the plugin, but also the ideas for the core as we move forwards. So are there any other questions?
Lots to digest.
Okay.
Sure,
Well,
I have one.
yes.
So suppose I'm working on graphics. This happens all the time, and I have a diagram for my course teaching wiki, and then I realize I want to tweak it. I've already uploaded it. Question, could I possibly, or could it be worked out so that if I upload a file that is identical in the name to one that's already there, that it will be replaced rather than added to the noise on the wiki?
So that's actually already the way that it would work. So if you go ahead and import the same file again to your TiddlyWiki, it will replace the file that's already saved, whichever saver backend you've decided to use. And one of the features that's been sort of on my mind that could also be nice as a future improvement is, let's say you've already uploaded an image, it's available in your wiki through a canonical URI tiddler. It would be nice to be able to still use the image editor to annotate it and save the updated version back to the server.
That's true as well. And I'm also wondering, though, whether the import might, for some uses, really want to give us an opportunity to notice a conflict of names and rename in the event that somebody keeps getting image -001s from some, sometimes we end up with a kind of a stubborn set of names, and rather than renaming first, I've forgotten, and then I don't want to automatically overwrite perhaps. So it's just an issue that I would love to be aware of different people's needs on.
So Elise, this is absolutely perfect. So again, for those that didn't see the chat, basically Elise is like, this is fantastic, wandered over to Open Collective and stuck $25 behind the GitHub saver right away.
Which is huge on my budget. I just got to I wish I could give more.
No, it's fantastic. So as an example, this is exactly it, is ideally what we'll do is we'll engage you and we'll capture your requests and also see what other people want. So this is the exact example of like, hey, that's a great idea. You've contributed, like anyone else is welcome to contribute ideas, but this in part is going to be driven and prioritized by people who can contribute. And I say contribute rather than cash, because of course, we can have other open source developers also contribute through code. And what we want to do is balance that back and forth and essentially give some user agency to say, well, I can't fund an entire developer by myself, but what I can do is encourage other people to participate and talk about what I need as a user and then try and help find others. So that's really the goal of getting that whole loop going.
And from my perspective, and I can't speak for other developers here, ignoring dollar amounts, just people that actually sign up through Open Collective, regardless of the amount, that's actually very encouraging, because to me, that's one person that's very, committed to the idea that this is something that's useful for them. And that drives my desire to actually continue working on it. So I would actually say that from my personal perspective, I would rather have 100 tiny amounts being contributed than a couple of, really big ones, because the more users that it's helping, the more motivated I am to put extra time into it.
Mm-hmm.
This actually reminds me of a shortcoming in the current beta version of the upload plugin that I'd like to highlight. So right now what happens is that when you upload the file, it uses the tiddler name. And it uses a literal tiddler name, which means that if you have any characters in there that shouldn't be in a file name, it's going to cause issues. And this is something that I'm tracking and it needs to be resolved. The issue we have there is just how do we generate a nice, pretty readable file name, but also make it unique so that two different tiddler titles cannot generate the same file name. So that is another area in which feedback would be very welcome, both from users, but also from other developers.
Can I share my screen so that we can dive into some more open?
Yes, absolutely.
Stuff? Awesome.
Boris, while you're doing that, I'd like to mention a few things. I think about a month or so ago, I think I came across TiddlyWiki on maybe Hacker News or someplace. And somebody had a very simple, elegant template put together, and I downloaded it and I started using it. And I'm basically a layperson, although our business is involved in a lot of application development. And I started using it personally just for odds and ends during the day. And I was like, oh my God, this thing is so nice and so simple. And what if I wanted to do this? What if I wanted to do this? What if I wanted to do that? Now, I'm a layperson and I don't have the patience to dig into the technical detail to accomplish the things that I wanted. But I think it's just such a flexible tool, and the mission that you guys are on, I applaud the work that you've done so far. And I think it's a very, very exciting tool. I really, really like it a lot. And I'm around a lot of technology as a user, as a business person that touches a lot of technology. So I commend the work that you guys are doing and really appreciate it and plan to get more involved.
Awesome. Thank you. Jeremy, are you 17 years young this year? What is the actual, is there an inception date? What's TiddlyWiki's birthday?
Forgive me, sorry. TiddlyWiki's birthday is September the 20th, 2004. I started work on it that summer, but that was the day that I actually put it live on the internet. And that was when everything changed, because people reacted to it. And then TiddlyWiki stopped being some stupid thing I was experimenting with and started becoming a kind of community phenomena as you know it today.
So just 1 month to the birthday, just a little over a month to the birthday.
Yes, it's not a big one though. I mean, we should be preparing ourselves for 3 years' time, I suppose.
Yes. Doesn't the year name 2024? I'm like, my mind, like personally, I'm like, do we get flying cars then? Because yes, that's what I think 2024 should be.
Yes, and it feels like it sometimes, doesn't it?
We have taken a bunch of time, and we technically have another half hour that we booked for this. But very, very briefly, what I just wanted to do is talk about Open Collective. Some of this is very much me collaborating with Jeremy and Zach and trying to say, hey, I know about some tools and techniques, is something that might be useful for the community. And as Jeremy said, this has been an experiment, and we're going to continue experimenting in public. So for those that don't know Open Collective, it's a pretty great system. It itself is open source. Other people can run copies of it and runs, and you can fund Open Collective. That's its main thing, is as you collect funds, some of those funds can actually go through to supporting the platform directly. As a longtime technologist, I'm super excited to see things like this for users and for software organizations that don't have to create an entire entity as a step one. Their recent blog posts of where they've kind of recentered themselves, they've done really amazingly over the last 2 years, last 18 months, as lots of people have realized that mutual aid is what is needed to get through various pandemics around the world. And of course, that has a lot in common with joining together to work on open source software. So this was a TiddlyWiki on fission experiment. That's what we initially called the title on it, as the easiest way to experiment without having to kind of go all in. I see Walt on the call. Thank you, Walt, and Abraham as well, for being early backers of our experiment. They are backing on a monthly basis, and those are the dollars that we have raised to date. The goal was always to take that and say, do something interesting with it. So can we fund a theme or an edition, or really just incent someone to do some work on it? So right now we're just like letting it collect, basically. And then the other thing we did is we reused that same space to create a project for this file upload plugin. I said, hey, I'm really enjoying this. This is great. I have this lovely, Zach talked about his passion and his interest in doing fashion photography. Outside of tech, mine is food. So I have a really fun TW groceries that is my kind of food explorations. And I said, what's missing for me is something to easily add images. So, talked with Jeremy and I said, like, hey, let's put this together. GitHub, Node.js, and then a fission one. I'll go ahead and personally pay for the first one. And then let's see who else is interested. And that before Zach was involved as well, saying, then let's find someone in the community who we can pay out. So Open Collective has both the concept of gathering funds and a budget, and it also has the concept of expenses. So at some point, Zach will essentially submit an invoice to this community Open Collective, and it'll all be handled and paid and transferred on the front end. So what's going to happen in the future? We've made some basic changes to kind of relabel it as the TiddlyWiki.org version of this rather than the TiddlyWiki on Fission one. So some of the early contributors have been grandfathered into clearly saying that they're backing TiddlyWiki on Fission. What can we do with it? Well, we can pay for some basic expenses, which is what we're going to talk about next. Can we get other members of the community paid? And then the final one, use it as a gathering point to pool funds for projects big and small. So what Anthony said, he's like, oh, I'm not really a developer, but I have some ideas. Great. If people want to contribute ideas and put the work together to collect people, then we can have a process whereby, again, you put up a project or a goal, and you collect funds, and then we try and connect that with someone in the community who has time and interest available to say, sure, I will build a first version of this in order for that. And there's a bunch of other things not mentioned here. So, might we in fact increase the bandwidth of the community so that at some point there are additional core developers who are actually paid by the community to do continued maintenance and upgrades and improvements. So that's all very future looking. It is very much up to the community, which includes all of us. So all of these things, when we say them, are also essentially a call for participation. If other people want to work on it in different ways, promoting it, working on it, talking about it, documenting it, sticking a widget on their own site to help spread the word or other things like that. Tons of places to be able to go with it. Jeremy, do you want to add some more about how you're thinking about this adventure might go? You're muted.
I love that it flashes up that you're muted, even quicker, even quicker than the other people tell you. No, it's interesting. There's what I'm about to say. I could actually say about one of the other topics that we're discussing. This is something that I've wanted to address for a long time. As in my sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for a long time has been to survive myself, and for a long time I survived by doing, whatever I could get people to pay me for, and then gradually I've got to the point where people are paying me to work on TiddlyWiki, and so now I really want to get to the point where that can extend to other people too. It's kind of easiest for me, but the challenge is to extend that to the community. Part of the reason is because my background inevitably is working in commercial enterprises, and I kind of, have very mixed feelings about it. I worked in small companies and massive companies, and let's just say that in my opinion, humanity compromises a lot in order to make those organizations work, and as individuals, we have to compromise a lot. So I'm really, the idea that a loosely knit collective of people around the planet can make a sort of economically meaningful arrangement together fills me with excitement. And I'd love to get to the point. I mean, my current Jeremy's business model is that clients pay me to sort of consult with them, so they get quite a big chunk of time for that. But in lots of ways, it would be an even happier life for me if I was working on the open collective model with a broader range of voices that were essentially paying to have me listen to them. So I'm really grateful to Boris for kicking this off. And, it's one thing to be enthusiastic about the idea, but to make this stuff work, it really helps to have the experience as well as the same keenness that I have that Boris has. So yes, my ambitions are, I'd like to get to, my ambition is to get to the point where as many people as are interested in the community can participate, and to the extent they want to, can take payment for doing their work.
One of the things that I think would be very interesting for the community, not just from a developer perspective, or for someone who wants to be able to, get paid for something that they enjoy doing, which is working on TiddlyWiki. In the TiddlyWiki community, we have some interesting additions, which is like polished versions of TiddlyWiki that have been published for a specific purpose. But we always find that, they lag behind when it comes to updates and responding to user feedback, because these are people using their spare time, whatever they can spare, to help out, and they aren't really able to devote enough time. So one of the things that could be absolutely fantastic is actually having editions published by community members who receive support through Open Collective, and then are able to set aside that extra time to listen to user feedback and provide updates and provide a better user experience. I think that would be fantastic, and I think that's an area that would really enrich the TiddlyWiki community.
Well, I want to mention, Soren and his book, the Grok book. This is a perfect example. You've got your own donation mechanism. I donated as soon as I saw it. It's a fantastic resource. And it's the kind of thing as how can we highlight that more so that you can be incented to keep it maintained and updated and so on. And I think there's always that loop of together as a community, we can form a platform that is larger than any individual. Yeah, just keep that loop going in different interesting ways. And it opens all sorts of like governance issues that we're going to have to deal with in different ways, right? So various subgroups saying, you know, maybe I'll reach out to the TiddlyWiki on Fission people and say, hey, what do you want to do with $132 US? It's not a lot, but maybe Walt, we might decide together to, in fact, donate that to Soren for his Grok work. And that's something that as contributors and backers, it's up to you to jointly decide what to do with it, which is kind of a lovely thing too.
Yeah, if I could just hop in here, I'm running into this open collective thing. Super excited about it. And I know I read about it on the forum earlier, but I didn't really understand it. So I feel like there's room for a lot more people who might become backers if we do a better job of explaining what it is, like we did on this call. I think there really are a lot of possibilities there. And, you know, personally, I'd be happy to contribute some money every month to help this move. So.
Fantastic. Consider this our first fundraising drive, this video call. Absolutely. So remember, like we literally just renamed it to tiddlywiki.org from TiddlyWiki on Fission, where, you know, Jeremy was sort of comfortable enough of still, we're not knowing exactly where it's going to go, but like, yeah, let's call this a TiddlyWiki thing rather than a Fission thing. And that's the plan going forward. Okay, I do want to cover the other new thing that's slowly floating around, which is the talk forum. We're calling it beta, and in that it's been installed, it's set up, it's generally working. Lots of questions being asked. As I said before, for folks who weren't on, Mario and Eric are helping out as administrators. I helped set it up, and I have a fair bit of experience with Discourse, so I'm supporting it as well. For those who haven't used the Discourse forum, and I am going to do a screen share of the demo, there's a ton of features that it has. It's not a mailing list. It can function as one, but it is a very rich kind of modern forum. Lots of features, embedding support for tweets, videos, backlinks, and transclusion is actually built in to the software. And we've enabled sign up so that you can have an account where you can use your regular email address and password. You can use your Google account. You can use your Twitter account. You can use your GitHub account to sign in and use those credentials for it. We have enabled, because of the history of the TiddlyWiki community and the Google groups, we have enabled reply by email and post by email as well. So I've literally had two opposite requests. Jeremy said, which button do I press so that I can interact with everything by email? So I told him how to do that. And Eric said, how the heck do you turn off all the GDAM email? I want to just go to it on the web. And I'm like, perfect. This is totally not going to be hard at all. Luckily, it does actually support both of those modes. And for those of you who still like it, it has RSS everywhere. I think I have a to-do to document that, but yes, Zach, you can actually get a feed of everything or per category and a bunch of other things like that. So that's all possible as well. So right now we are mirroring the Google groups as read-only. So what that means is every post sent to the Google group also appears in the forum, and it properly threads and replies and all that other good stuff. But if you're logged in through the forum, and you'll actually recognize based on your email address, you will have an account staged for you. If you use that same email address, then whether you're on the Google group or the forum, you'll own those accounts and be able to do things with it. And I put a little example so that right now you can transclude posts, and so that they're natively in the forum then as well. I am going to again say thank you to Eric and Mario for volunteering as admins and moderators. And Eric, I know I was just like, here's some keys. Don't worry about it. You're just a backup. That's still the case. We're all learning together. So I just appreciate a few more people having distributed responsibility, and we'll continue to ask for support in things like, I'm the only one with keys to the server. Jeremy owns the DNS. But as an example, at least one other person who has access to the physical server where this is hosted should be around, so there aren't single points of failure. And two, so not everything has Jeremy's name attached to it, which I think is another part of kind of scaling the community. Right?
Boris.
Yes.
Elise is asking if we can edit posts eventually, and I'm guessing that refers to the Google Groups imports.
So the Google Groups right now is read only, but in general, when you post to the forum, it is a forum that you own, so you can go ahead and edit as many times as you want. Like a wiki, it actually shows diffs and so on, so other people can go in and see the changes, but all posts are editable directly on the site. For the stuff that comes in via Google Groups, we've turned off editing right now because we kind of have to figure out exactly how that back and forth is going to go between the Google group. I am briefly, and I'm going to basically show you the sites if you haven't checked it out yourself. This is again, as I put question marks behind these things. Jeremy has gnashed his teeth over the years at the GitHub discussions forum. And so that might be an example of quite soon turning that off and using the developer category for more long form discussion versus I'm writing up a technical issue right next to code. And in fact, there's a GitHub integration that lets you go back and forth between the two very nicely as well. Various people have said, what if we imported the Google Groups and turned off Google Groups? That is not a small task. That will be less about raising funds and more about getting a group of people who want to form essentially a project team to execute on that. And ideally, other than as someone who says, this looks good, this doesn't look good, none of those people will be named Jeremy. Well, unless there's another Jeremy in the community whose last name isn't Rustin, that can be allowed. Mario has already done some tinkering on the icons and a few other things, and the emoji. We could totally do custom themes. And in fact, you can have per user themes. We haven't turned on a lot of those features, but that's totally possible. The final thing being, this is a community project. So more contributors wanted to participate and contribute in all sorts of different ways. Don't just think code, don't think just admin or servers, think what would it look like to welcome more people into the TiddlyWiki community and in this type of forum? How would we want them to introduce themselves? Who would help create guides? Might we put together a category called videos where we curate videos around the web and bring them together in a central location? And of course, there's the tension of which of these things do we do with our own tool, TiddlyWiki, and which of them do we do in this forum? But that's kind of at the idea stage. Before I switch over to a screen share of just the forum so I can give you a little tour that way, questions, comments, thoughts? Franco, I'll answer your question. Franco asks, looking at the tiddlywiki.org talk, is there a user experience section? Where can we discuss these ideas? So my general approach into designing forums is I tend to be conservative with the set of categories. Don't stress too much about it. The default or uncategorized category is called discussions, where literally anything goes. So you can go ahead and create a discussion post, and you can use tags to, for instance, tag it with UX or first-time user or other things like that. And if we find that there's a lot of posts in that category, or Franco, someone like yourself might step up and say, hey, can I have a user experience focused category that is focused like this. Great. Post it, have the idea, great idea, and then we create it and have a dedicated category for it. That's kind of how I see it going. Does that make sense, Franco?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great. And in general, the whole surfacing and prioritizing, this is the community loop. This is all of us. So if you know someone who's interested in this, if you have an idea, this is going to be the collective sort of idea forming and trying to get more people teamed up to work on different areas and actually move them forward and get them from the talking about to doing stage, and ideally get better at that at a community level.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to chime in here just for a second, just to take this opportunity to say thank you to Boris. Because apart from hosting this call, all this work with, setting up discourse is an enormous amount of work. And we really appreciate, what you're doing for the community here. And even the support for the file uploads plugin. And also a thank you to Fission, because all the discussions that we were supposed to be having about, Fission related things in TiddlyWiki, like TiddlyWiki on Fission, have always ended up being 70% us talking about the core, and Boris helping out with that conversation and providing perspective and input. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, you're welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. And so for those who don't know, this started off with me and Fission hiring Jeremy, and where we've ended up is in this situation where Jeremy tinkers with some Fission stuff, and in exchange, I tinker with TiddlyWiki community stuff, and it's been really, really lovely. I am a user and I'm a member of the community, so I'm happy to do it, and I think it's ended up in a really, really great spot, and it's been lovely to get to know Zach a little better as well. So I have been I think I wrote it up. I started using TiddlyWiki in around 2005 or so. So I've been around for a while, and it's lovely to still be around.
Indeed, I'd add my voice to Zach's to thank you, Boris. And I guess we should also thank Discourse, because I mentioned before things that we wanted to do for a long time. I set up the Google group in 2005, and I think we've all hated it almost ever since, really. Like democracy, it's not a joke anymore, is it? But the worst forum software apart from all of the others, kind of thing. And Discourse over the years has obviously now attained an enormous center of gravity. And in fact, it seems to me a much more sort of mature ecosystem in a funny way than WordPress, because it's a bit newer, and so it doesn't have as much legacy. So everything I've seen about it seems quite nice to work with. It is an experiment, it is in beta, but to be super clear, the plan, just so that you know what questions to ask, the plan will be to turn off Google Groups, or at least to make it read-only, so that people can go there and search. It's the bi-directional thinking is, it's an awesome way to get us through this initial, the initial experimental beta period. But long term, there's far too much potential confusion from having two separate systems, both thinking they're in charge. So I hope sooner rather than later, we'll put the Google Groups forum into read-only mode, put a bunch of messages up saying, come here instead, and crucially explaining to people how they can find their original thread to reply to a thread, that bridges that gap. So that's where we're going. And as Boris says, even if we didn't do the migration, that's still going to take a little, a number of carefully thought out steps to make sure that we don't leave users adrift. But a big part of that is stuff that what Boris has mentioned, you haven't seen yet, which is the ability to log in with lots of different identities and so on. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to use the forum, and hopefully that will mean that when the time comes and everybody has to make the switch, we'll have a smoother transfer as possible.
Amazing, great. And Franco's trying it out in real time and discovering the anti-spam features. So we'll get all these things sorted for sure. So this is in fact the sign up, and I was able to whitelist the registration and event software that we use. So it's embedded here directly. And I'm logged in. I'm seeing a special message here because I'm an admin. We see Mario's upgraded site logo in the top left. This little icon, if you're going through just the web, will give you all your notifications. You can mix and match email around these different things. This is the admin account. So I've sent myself a test private message. So one of the things with the Google group is it exposes email addresses pretty aggressively, which is not great for everyone. And in this method, you can talk to people and message them and manage whether or not you want to continue hearing from them without exposing your email address, which I think is definitely a good thing. I've pinned this. It's in the discussion forum. I've tagged it with event. You see I'm logged in, so I have this edit button and all sorts of other superpowers. If you look, everything has a permalink. So this has this nice friendly name. There's good SEO with the discourse forum, and this is ID 28. As I scroll, I'm not sure if you can see that URI up there in dark mode. As I scroll, as soon as I get to viewing Sachs' comment, it'll actually show that has ID 3. And it does a few other interesting things. Literally, as you scroll, it sets your read and unread status. And you can configure this as well of like, yep, you've read this all learning. So if I came back and there were new posts, it would actually jump me straight to them. And so Sachs already come in and put these other resources. Now, if there were other people on the account, I could see a couple of other things. I've set things up a little. So if I type, see how it says here, T replying? I've got another window open where I'm logged in with the admin account. So there's a certain liveness to it, right? So, and if there were multiple people, it would actually show them all typing and replying now, saying that there was other stuff that was coming. I don't have an avatar. Yep, there's someone great, amazing, which is pretty great. And I'll go to the main homepage here. And again, this will be customized for me. It does a lot of work, especially for heavy information forums, to see what you want to see and that you can customize in different ways. So I'm going to reveal now that I actually have muted the Google group. So I can go in and I can see it and I can browse it and it'll show me read and unread. You can see all these blue icons that I've clicked through to a couple things, like I went and checked out. Oh, very cool. So this is Jeremy has an account on the forum, but this is him because he used the same email address. That's him posting through the Google group. In this account, Burning Tree Seed, that's posted this, right? Mohammed replied, and then someone's come in here and I can hover over these reactions that are happening here. And it looks like, in fact, discovering the 20 character requirement, perfect. Live demos are always good for stuff like this. There's all sorts of other things. So there's features for anti-spam. So I'd need to go into the admin and I'd need to look up, I'm going to assume that Franco has something to do with Franco. And so I go in here. Franco, is that you?
Yes, that is me with hair. I no longer have hair.
So I need to go in and I'd actually need to go to the admin and I'm going to say, okay, rather than a basic user, I'll just go ahead and make you a regular. And you now have a bunch of other permissions. So you can even go in and edit titles and fix spelling mistakes for people. This is not a lot of moderation usually. As users participate, Discourse recognizes that they should be recognized as a regular user, and it will actually automatically add those trust requirements. Obviously, a lot of this is designed around the hostile environment of the open internet, but in a really nice way that it takes a lot of the load off of things. We've got the meta forum where we're discussing a bunch of different things about how the software, the forum might work. Because we've just launched it, the meta forum, of course, has lots of information in it. It also has private forums. So for administrators and moderators, we have a private area where we can talk about working on the site itself. And that same thing can scale. I figure at some point we'll in fact create a forum category called Google Groups Migration and literally use the forum itself to discuss how to do that and arrange work and do other things like that. And so Franco asked before, like, how do we get people to do this? And well, we're going to keep doing calls for this and see who wants to put up their hand and contribute with these things. Anything else that people want me to show them or have questions about while I've got the interface open? Go ahead. You unmuted yourself, so I'm prompting you.
Oh, no, I don't know why I unmuted myself. I must have been anticipating helping to answer whatever the next question was going to be.
Yeah, so go ahead.
I was going to ask a quick question, Boris. I noticed there was a plugins area, and I know we're also doing the TiddlyLinks thing. Do we anticipate, actually putting our plugins and having the voting mechanism? So, it's one of the things from a plugins perspective that I think we're also trying to solve with the TiddlyLinks is to show which ones are the most popular, probably the most well supported, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that part of that vision?
So this is me going, hey, maybe this category makes sense. And then Zach and I having a need of saying, we need some place to talk about file uploads. And so there's a couple of posts and a couple of people have made comments here about this already, which is great. You can see our discussion. So the way that I envision it is that any developer who wants a dedicated category can ask for one and we'll make you one. So it has a very specific community use case that isn't necessarily the same as like voting or ranking or a canonical list, but rather another community resource. Instead of every developer having to set up their own, you're welcome to have a forum here. There's some pretty interesting embed stuff that you can do. So you can actually embed the discourse forum as comments. So as a developer, you might actually keep stuff on GitHub or a blog. And as you do releases, let's say blog posts or changelog releases, it could automatically have a comment thread that comes back to the same core TiddlyWiki community.
To pick up one part of what you were saying about TiddlyWiki links, an exciting thing about Discourse is that it has an API, and you may have noticed when Boris was looking at Franco's user data that it kind of, one of the things it lists was whether Franco's requested API keys. So it kind of, it surfaces the API in a way that we haven't seen since Twitter in the early days. So therefore, one of the things that we could do is use it as a source for links. I think it's links.tiddlywiki.com. Probably should change that too. We could make it so that posts to the plugins group that met a certain format that we would scrape and shove into the links directory. But I think that probably, to me, it feels like they're slightly different, that links, when it works well, as you say, is about sort of popularity, whereas the discussion forum would be, I think, more about asking questions. And so I'd hate to get to the point where people were giving lots of this plugin is great messages in order to push its rankings up. If you see what I mean, we shouldn't conflate discussion with signals about popularity.
Right, and just about TiddlyWiki links there, I'd like to clarify in case there is any misunderstanding that it's really not meant to be for developers to have a means to, get their plugins listed. The actual idea is for all of the community members that when you want to bookmark things related to TiddlyWiki, if you do it in a wiki and do it in the format that's expected by TiddlyWiki links, all of your bookmarks end up in there as well. And then when you want to search, you go to TiddlyWiki links to search, and you get the benefit of your own bookmarks and those of other people. And enough people do that, then we can start to rank things by popularity, and you kind of get an organic indicator for which are the most popular plugins, and not just plugins, but discussion threads, resources with information, things like that. But for that, we do need more people to actually use it in that manner. So what I personally do is every time I find something that I want to keep track of that's TiddlyWiki related, I add it there. Every time I need to give somebody a link in a forum post or something where they need a resource related to TiddlyWiki links, I add it there. And if everyone did that, we would have the necessary data to be able to do interesting things with it.
And I think this is probably, like, notice a common theme about working together and having collectives. I think the meta point here, Zach, is where do we go to discuss links.tiddlywiki.com, right? There's the static about page, but if I have a question about how the site works, that discussion might very well take place on talk. And all of a sudden we start seeing where some of this activity goes within the community as shared resources.
Exactly that, yes.
Yeah. This is useful. I'll stop screen sharing, and I think we're close to time here. This is a very dynamic interface. So it will show new and updated stuff for me over time, which is one of the other things that makes it fairly different than traditional forum software. You know, I have a draft open. I can save drafts and come back to them. It does a really good job of saving both comment replies and new posts. There is a mobile app, which really just is a wrapper that it gives you then mobile notifications of some of these things, both Android and iOS. That works pretty well. If you plug in links, I actually typed in a link and it'll go and it'll actually fetch the social graph headers and grab more information about it. And if I were to do a, and this is a live preview, obviously, of what's going on here. So various, I actually have a tweet ahead of me. But if I grabbed an individual tweet, it would actually expand the tweet and stick it in here. So some really interesting things. Same thing, if you stick in GitHub links, you'll get rich previews of various things. So with that, you know, here's some nice options. I can discard it, I can save it, I can keep editing. You know, the usability of this is really quite good. Other questions, comments, thoughts on the forum?
Do we have any plan as to when this is going to become, I don't know, quote unquote, the official TiddlyWiki forum? Like, you know, if I'm introducing new users or posting a link for help in Graph TiddlyWiki, at what point should I consider this the place that I should send people?
I guess that'll be probably when we update tiddlywiki.com, that Tiddler forums. So it'd be kind of when we come out of beta, I guess. So when we've made the irrevocable move. And I'm not sure because how quickly we move, a lot of that depends on the community and how people find the transition. But I'm hoping that everybody will be really excited and we'll flick the switch in late September.
Okay. I'll say it a little differently as well, which is I think step one is agreeing on what the goalposts are to move. And you've mentioned something like updating on tiddlywiki.com, and that'll be up to you all and Jeremy basically being like, okay, I will be comfortable doing that when X, Y, and Z is done. So is that, you know, do we have to wait for a historical import of 11 years of Google groups, or is that okay to do post? And then the question becomes, great, who's going to volunteer to do the Google Groups import? I know that's a lot, but I'm going to keep harping on the, like, it's up to all of us. Does that make sense, Soren?
Yes.
Awesome. The Google Groups import, I do think, is it's somewhat moot whether we actually want to do that, because the existing forum, for instance, goes back to 2005, so it has a lot of archaeology in there. Seems no obvious reason why we'd clog up the backups with that. So I'd really like some feedback on it, but my instinct is that if the archive is safely there on Google Groups and we make it searchable, that in the end, that will be better for everybody, even though in the transition, there will be a kind of looking in two places thing, overlapping in a house move kind of thing. But again, interested in other people's views.
Well, I know I personally have a few hundred posts on Google Groups just starred so that I can go back to them, but something like importing those would be a good idea.
Well, it may be a selective import is the way to go. I mean, I know any opportunity we have to allow them where people can cheaply curate the content that's important to the community is really valuable. So if there was a way to scrape your stars and other people who volunteered, that would seem like a great start. But yes, I'd echo what Boris says. This is so far outside of my comfort zone personally as to be hilarious. And Boris is so far inside his comfort zone that it's dangerous. We do really need, I mean, this is something that a lot of us care about a little. And what would be great is those of us who, care about it a bit more were able to pull together a team, as Boris suggests.
Yeah, and then I think, a really, really great example really was the Jeremy saying, where's the email me everything button? And Eric going, oh God, how do I turn all of the email off, right? And it like, those are the exact kind of things that we need as asks and feedback. And I've tried to be very active in like screenshots of where to go in preferences and other things like that, where there is this meta of learning to use this new tool, and including which, as the community inhabits it, customizing it with themes and plugins and other things that makes it the TiddlyWiki discussion forum, which will, of course, sit on top of discourse features, but will be unique to what this community decides how it wants it to work, right?
And I'll be voting for the background that you can see here to become the background.
This is the part where I go in and set that just to Jeremy's background.
Shadow background. Very good. Very good.
Awesome. Thank you all for attending. I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop recording button for starters.